Good afternoon and welcome to the Weekend Wellness Hour. I am very excited to have a guest today, Carron Montgomery, who I met a couple months ago, and we had a nice conversation about the pandemic and how it affects mental health and how it has affected mental health for all ages, from little ones all the way to adults. And I wanted to bring her on today so she could share with you how she's been helping people, and she now speaks to organizations, schools, churches, and she really has provided a lot of benefits to people in the world right now. And I want to come and have her come on and share with us today. So thank you so much, Carron, for joining us.
You're welcome. I'm excited to be here and very excited to kind of open the conversation about the pandemic from a mental health perspective so that we could keep talking and keep helping. A little bit about myself. I live in Kansas City. I have a private practice with two other women and specialize in treating anxiety, depression, and trauma for the most part. I work with people all the way from 4 to 70, but deal with a smaller range of issues, although there are aspects of those in every mental health presentation. Before that, I worked at two local nonprofits. One, I started off working at a place called Moxo, where I treated sexually abused children, and then went into working more inner city, doing some work with kids that kind of were in and out of care, and did a lot of reintegration therapy. And then I had kids of my own, and I decided I had to practice what I was preaching. So I needed to go into private practice so that I could just see people and then be with my kids, and not do the meetings and the things that, had changed. So that's a little bit about me. I'm a licensed professional counselor, registered play therapist, and then I'm level 2 certified in a trauma treatment called EMDR. And I love talking about the brain.
Oh, it's great. I love having you on here. And you're also certified in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral, right?
Yes.
And can you explain what that is a little bit? Because I know that could apply, right?
Yes. Well, so there are many different modalities. And to be honest with you, when people ask what I do, I say I can't really tell you because it depends on what client is being presented. And so I merge aspects of EMDR, which is a form of it's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is getting your brain to talk to each other, which I'll talk a whole lot about. And then play therapy, and it can be non-directive or psychoed based. And TFCBT is just kind of more trauma work, merging with cognitive behavioral skills and more narrating your trauma. And it is really fun to teach parents how to narrate things, little t traumas that happen all day long, and how you can change the brain just by telling a story. And so I think those are some cool things that I'll get to, and I have a lot of resources and things that I'm eager to share. So
that's great. And one of the beauties, in the past, I'd say decade, is mental health is becoming more talked about, and it's not so much taboo. And I know growing up when I was younger, it was kind of taboo. If someone had some kind of mental health issue, no one really liked to talk about it. But now it's becoming more the forefront. And I truly believe that we need people like you to help us get through all these mental issues that we have, because there's no guidebook for life. We kind of just fumble through. And so it's nice to have someone who knows the research of how to help people.
Yeah, and I think that you make a really important point. And I think that you're right. We've moved to a place where mental health is not as taboo. And I think that's one thing that the pandemic has been kind of helpful for, is that people that may not have ever experienced anxiety and depression are still experiencing the phases and stages of COVID and the grief process. And the other really interesting thing, and I think this is important to note, is that our teens are more mental health savvy than most adults. And so this is a weird time where they kind of know more in some ways than we do. And we need to say, hey, teach us what's going on, and teach us how, you're okay with talking about it.
Yeah, that's amazing. I never even thought about that, but sometimes we're just so much in our heads, and I guess they're not in that sense, and or
Yeah.
they have a little bit more insight.
Yes.
So when the pandemic hit, what did you see initially in terms of mental health and kind of how we were responding?
Well, it was interesting because, I, like everybody else, I mean, it kind of came out of nowhere, and all of a sudden, poof, here we are. So there's that initial kind of scary part. And I thought, this is going to be really interesting to see how my clients that are anxious and depressed really handle this. And they actually thrived, because they were finally in the comfort of their own home. And this overscheduling, for anyone that's OCD or anxious with social anxiety, they were protected. And so they weren't running from one thing to the next. That was a point in time where the schools didn't know what to do. So they were very understanding. Kids were finally getting the sleep that they needed. And they were getting family time. I know I was playing basketball with my kids. I had homemade dinner every night. So there were a lot of buffering factors. And this isn't for everyone, but typically jobs were more understanding. And so parents were more available at the beginning. And what I noticed that was so interesting is I started to see people that had no predisposition towards, having anxiety or depression. And all of a sudden it came on, and it came on strong and fast. And they were like, whoa, what is this? I saw full-blown OCD coming on. And those were the kids that, as I started to kind of dive in and think, okay, what's the difference here? They had been the ones that poured their heart and soul into playing all the sports, doing all the things, staying super busy. And for the first time ever, they had to sit and think, because sports were canceled, and they said, I couldn't even watch sports. And so they were in their brain for the first time, alone.
And that can be a scary place if you don't know how to think or what to think, because so many of us, when we're alone in our brains, it sometimes goes to negative thoughts or doubtful thoughts. And that's not a healthy place to be.
So I think one of the biggest things, as we're kind of going to be shifting through talking about the phases and interventions and things, is the biggest takeaway is that we didn't prepare our kids or ourselves to be more present and to be able to sit with our emotions. I think that we just assume, okay, people have feelings, there's good and bad feelings, and you kind of go with it, and we don't really teach people what to do with it. And so that's what I was seeing. These kids were having these huge emotions, and they didn't even know how to label them, much less what to do with them. So really teaching them all feelings have a purpose. And I love the book Superpowered. It teaches you that all of our feelings are just messengers. So it's, what is the message? What is my brain trying to tell me? And it takes that it's not good or bad. It simply just is. And we get to choose how we think about those. So that's what I saw at the beginning, for sure. And then I kind of saw things shift into the summer, where people did okay. I think there was a little bit of things seemed a little less scary, and we were outside, and people were just kind of thinking this will end, and so it wasn't something they were thinking was going to be so long. But when kids went back to school, I saw all of it colliding, because the kids that had been anxious and depressed prior, that had been like kind of having a break, they were ramped up. And then the other kids that had never experienced it were ramped up, and adults were ramped up. And then just this overall like isolation and fear of spreading it, not spreading it, what's right, what's wrong, constant change, kind of had everyone in a really negative feedback loop. And I think that speaks to our brain. When we think about our brain as being something, I always tell people, the more things fire together, the more they wire together. So the neuronal networks in our brain kind of form this roadmap for how we relate to the world. And so, kids didn't know that. And we have teachers that are anxious, kids that are anxious, and all of us are feeding off of each other. And so instead of adults really understanding the need to co-regulate, I think everyone was dysregulating each other. And so we just saw a really huge spike in a lot of mental illness.
And I can understand that too, because I know certain people who have this amazing ability to handle change and respond and react quickly. And they can do this on a daily basis where they'll make a decision, then switch it, then switch it, then switch it based on feedback coming in. And they seem to just weave through life. And so something like this, like the pandemic, they can change easier. And then there are those of us who like the sense of stability, the sense of security, and we like a more constant regimen. And so something that is a big change or causes several changes, like you're saying, kind of in the fall where things were changing a lot, I can see it's very disrupting. And so is it that we need to work on our ability to change and be more flexible? Is that kind of part of it?
I think what we need to do is work on being present and able to tolerate all feelings and to understand that they serve a purpose. They're not good, they're not bad, but that they're telling us something isn't right. And I think we need to be more in the present. And I also think as a society, we need to help understand that because our brain is a muscle and it has different parts, we know it works best when we use our whole brain. But we have our emotional side, and then we've got our logical side, and we have different parts. And our social muscle is a part of our brain we haven't used in a while. So these kids, like their social and academic muscles have been understimulated, and what's been overstimulated are the like impulsive social media, technology. So we have to build the muscles back up too before we expect that kids can tolerate certain things. And even adults that have some social anxiety, well, you want to expect that it's going to be hard instead of be surprised it's going to be hard. And it's okay to not be okay. We can do it. I think that's a huge part of it.
That's interesting. So then when the fall hit and we kind of are going through all this change, was there a shift then when winter, because normally holidays kind of bring out, a little bit of festivity. What was the mental health kind of status at that point?
One thing I'll say too, kind of going back to the fall, I found that the most vulnerable age groups were about 11 to late 20s, depending on what stage of life you were in. Like, did you have a job before? Did you have a family? But anyone in any state of flux or experiencing a brain burst or a brain change was really vulnerable, along with the elderly who were more isolated and felt so much fear. And so these kids, they would say to me, I feel lonelier than I've ever felt, Miss Carron. And they said, and I started thinking, I thought, okay, well, they normally were able to go to high school or middle school with the safety of their friends. And then when we went to hybrid, they didn't have their friends to be there. And so they were with people, but lonelier. And that was really confusing, is why am I lonely when I'm with people? And it's because you weren't actually with them and they didn't have those protective buffering factors, or if a boyfriend broke up with you, or if you lost someone, it was grief on grief on grief, and it was too much. But as we went into the winter, it was specifically, I can speak more to Kansas City. Winters in Kansas City can be interesting. We happen to have COVID fatigue, I call it, which is the next phase where everyone's on empty and just feeling hopeless and helpless, coincide with the coldest weather where people couldn't go outside. And I saw, prior to that, I saw a massive increase in panic disorder about 2 to 3 months before that with kids, just a sudden onset of panic. And then just hopelessness and helplessness and this, I'm done. A lot of suicidal ideation. In Kansas City, we, in the public schools, a 50% increase in Fs for high school students. And these are great kids. These are great kids. And they just didn't care. And I think part of it too is we didn't prepare them to say, okay, your brain is a muscle. these are the things you can do. If you get up and you still shower like you're going to school, and you get exercise and you do these things, you won't feel so horrible. But everyone was so caught up on how are we going to have them learn academically. They're behind that's where all of our power and energy went, which is great. But the problem is when the brain is anxious or panicky, our amygdala puts us into fight, flight, or freeze. And if we're frozen, we can't even learn. So we really needed to start with more basic, how do we make people feel emotionally safe? And there's no one to blame. Everyone was doing doing the best they can. And we've never been in a pandemic together with social media and all these things. So we're all learning for the first time. So that's kind of what I saw. And just kids really feeling just so sad and lonely. And a lot more kids are going to the ER for mental health issues, and just left and right. So it's coming out everywhere. And one of my favorite quotes when we kind of start talking about the brain, which I could geek out and talk about the brain all day long, but I love Dan Siegel and Bruce Perry. They have amazing things about the brain, but I love this quote. It's from Dr. Bryson. It says, the experiences our kids have with us and in the world don't just influence their behaviors, but actually how their brains get wired. So we can think about the brain as an association machine, neurons that fire together, wire together, kind of like what I said. And so we have to teach our kids not to be terrified of feeling anxious, that it's okay to feel anxious, or it's okay to feel scared. So that then what we don't talk about, we know the brain from an evolutionary perspective is more drawn to the negative. They assume it's bad. And then they make more neuronal networks that form around that. And so it's easier to jump to these, oh gosh, this is a horrible feeling, or something really bad's going to happen. So
that makes sense. And when we got through the new year, did you see any changes in kind of this, how kids were going through panic disorders, or was there some hope?
Interestingly, the kids that have been in therapy are faring way better, because the kids that were in therapy prior, because they have the skills, this isn't new for them. They've felt these horrible feelings. But for these kids that haven't before, I found I really, something that I changed in my practice was I had parents sit in on most sessions, because I thought, we don't have enough time for this kid to form any more negative neuronal networks. And I need you to see what I'm doing and how I'm doing it in the language that I'm using. So I had parents in session, and I've also started doing a lot more parent support sessions to say, hey, this is what your kid's going through. How to model it, how to like normalize and validate it. So a lot more parental involvement. And I've also had a lot more involvement with school counselors, because we need a team right now. Things have gotten really big.
Yeah. And now we're kind of starting to open schools back up again. So it's good to have this prepared. So that way they have some resources, right?
Yeah. And I think these kids too, what we also have to keep in mind is, even though it's good that they're in person, it's not normal in person. And so we do them a disservice not to acknowledge and say, hey, what's it like to be you in a pandemic? You teach us, because we don't know. We didn't live in a pandemic as a teen, going through high school with social media. We don't. So we don't know. And the reality is, it's really scary. And they feel very alone, and going back, they're terrified about. And you'd think they'd be excited, but they're actually scared.
Well, they've seen us be scared. You know, they see our fear and us not knowing up or down, left or right, wear a mask, don't wear a mask, all of the things. And when we're unsure, I imagine that they're feeding off of that as well.
Yeah, I think that there's that mirror neurons piece. And then there's also the piece that's really interesting and important that I tell people is, kids, if you don't explain something age appropriately, they're going to make up their own scenario or their own fantasy, and it's going to be way worse than the reality. And it usually involves somehow them being at fault. And so it's really important to have conversations, because a lot of people are like, oh, I never even talked to my kid about the pandemic. And I'm like, well, we need to do that. And we need to, say, yes, there's been so much change, but no pandemic has ever lasted forever. We can do this. It will end. There's nothing I can't handle. I'm with you.
Yeah.
And like, what are you most excited to do when we get out of it to the new norm? And what do you want to take with you? Like, I know I learned more of what I want to keep than what I don't want.
Yeah.
And so it, and there are certain things that I think they want to keep and certain emotional boundaries that they want to have.
Absolutely. I mean, it's been a great learning experience, and I like how you're phrasing it and getting the kids to think about what was the good that came out of it. What did they learn? And hopefully a lot of the kids that you're helping now that you weren't seeing before, now they have these skills that they can apply to other situations in school and social interactions, because this part of life is going through things, and it's not always going to be great. There's going to be some challenges, and now they have a skill set that was forced upon them, but it's going to help them even more so than maybe their parents who didn't have that skill set.
And that is what I've really said to these kids is, you're going to be better prepared. And one of the other things that I love about teaching them about the brain is we don't learn from doing something perfect. We don't learn from doing the same thing over and over, but we do learn from when we make mistakes and fail or have a challenge. And they are learning so much, and they are so mature in terms of what matters, and just, they amaze me. And I think the reason I started speaking was because I was learning so much from them that I felt like I have to share this with the world, and I have to help. So definitely.
Yeah. That's wonderful. So could we go through maybe some of the skills at different age groups so that we can educate parents and even those who don't have kids, but
yes.
them?
Well, I mean, I think first too, we start with adults, because we set the stage, we set the emotional temperature of a room, and kids look to us, and they are so resilient and so intuitive that they know if something is wrong before we even know. So I think the first thing is we really check in with ourselves, and we practice what we preach.
Okay.
I have loved doing these talks because I feel like, I'm like, oh, why am I not doing that with my kids? And then I start doing it. I'm like, it works. So the biggest thing is to take care of ourselves and to notice if we're not okay. And to be able to say too, you know what? Mommy's having a really stressed day, and the pandemic's really hard, but it's not about you, and it'll end. And maybe I'm going to practice, and then you model. I'm going to practice taking deep breaths, teaching them about what happens when our body goes into fight, flight, or freeze, that it sends an alarm. And it can be, this is where Carron Young, she has her books, Hey Warrior and Hey Awesome. It sends an alarm to our brain. But the problem is, it's kind of like a smoke detector. It doesn't care if there's real danger or if there just might be. So it's learning to help them decode, what is this message? Is it just saying, you have something you're really excited about, and your fight or flight response system is charged, and it's giving you extra energy to play a really good game or do the speech? Is it a message that makes you want to connect with others, or is it just junk mail that is totally useless? And so teaching kids to see their feelings as messengers, I think, is like the most important thing. And for little kids too, to just say, I notice you look this way, or I know it looks like you may feel, I wonder, it looks like, those kind of statements for little ones are really important. And then for little kids too, I think a lot of bibliotherapy, I can provide a list of a ton of different books, but you can really start teaching them young. And then apps, the Calm app, Brain Tap, all of these apps that teach us to slow down and actually breathe. Because breathing is something that, as you know, is something we have with us at all times. And my kiddos will just say, like, I feel like I can't breathe. And so we have to practice these skills when we're calm, so that when we're not calm, we can use them. And so like these other apps, they have tiny little meditations or sleep stories. And so building that muscle, Yoga Pretzels is a fun game, or on YouTube, you can Google any meditation or anything like that. So really or taking a hike and noticing the leaves, being present. But I also think helping them understand their emotions at a young age is huge. And as a parent, knowing if a kid is in an emotional state, if you think of your brain, Dan Siegel does this hand model, which I love. This is the part of our brain that is all the things like breathing, things we don't think about doing. And here's our amygdala, which is our fight or flight, midbrain, all of our memories. And then here's the thinking, reasoning. If your kid's having a strong emotion, they flip their lid and they're offline. So your job is to help calm them and then talk to them about helpful things that they can do. Parents often get in this like tug of war of, okay, you're not doing what you're supposed to, so now I'm going to get mad at you. And then the brain's mirror neurons, everybody's dysregulated and it's a nightmare, as opposed to a wonderful learning experience. So like, you look really mad right now, and it's not okay to hit your sister, but you can, do X, Y, or Z. It doesn't mean you don't have punishments or consequences.
Right.
And for the little ones too, I also think it's really important. You can do visual schedules because so much has changed. We have to imagine that they've spent more time with their parents than they ever have, which is a really great benefit. But now we're about to kind of strip that from them. And so it's going to be really hard. So I say even start by like running small errands, if you haven't left your kid, making a visual schedule of what the day is going to look like. Parents oftentimes, a kid will say it's tomorrow a school day, and they'll say no, because they don't want to have their kid freak out. They need to freak out and then be okay and have that predictability for them. So, and I love having parents tell stories at night. Sometimes kids love anything through the metaphor, and when they're kind of half drowsy, it's a really great time to talk about something that maybe you learned from, or make sure that they're getting good sleep too.
Okay.
And then with our older kids, I think with all kids, you want to normalize it, validate, explain it, and allow space for it. But then there's that added step of, and then what to do with it, which is needed even more right now. And then I have seen that middle schoolers are really, really struggling. And I think for them, it's really validating. This is really, really hard. And I want to the way that we parent shifts from like, you're still their parent, but going from this independence to interdependence to a different type of communication, and saying, I'm the parent, my job is to keep you safe, but I want to hear what you have to say. Teach me, help me understand. And for them, I think it's teaching them some good sleep hygiene. I really think education about the brain is important, and showing them what too much social media can do. A lot of my kids really like when their parents say, okay, we're going to do airplane mode for 20 minutes, 2 times a day. They are free to then disconnect, and they are able to not have to be on, where they can be seeing what they're missing, being bullied. So really remembering those things and helping them understand that they get to choose what thoughts they believe. So the other book, the Superpower book, one of the other things I love is this aha moment. I don't have to believe all my thoughts. I can choose the thoughts I believe and care about. Thoughts are not commands I have to obey, are not always true, and don't always need my attention. And so I think it's really important to help kids notice, like, is this a thought that's going to take you into a time traveling worry runaround, or is this a thought that's real? So I love in that book, they do a what if then, because that a lot of times will like stop the worry runaround, because the what if, they're like, what if I fail this test? Okay. And they keep going. Then they're like, and they really do. They time travel so far that they then don't have a job and they don't have a family. And so to say, well, okay, if you fail this test, then you will realize that this is important to you, and we'll talk to your teacher, and you'll study harder next time, and we can find a way to work on it. So like, rather than going and going and going for hours, or saying, okay, what's the worst case scenario? What's the best case? And what's the most likely? Usually the worst case scenario isn't even bad. It's just the fantasy of it that kids can get so caught up in. So, and just letting them know we're here. They need us now more than ever. And it's really interesting. I think that we miss that. And a behavior is there to tell us something. Like if a kid is acting in a different way, something is going on internally. And it's our job to figure out what that is.
Absolutely. And that's why we're here to support them and
Mhm.
guide them.
Yeah. And
So
I think
what,
the other stuff would be like really teaching exercise. Like a lot of these kids aren't moving because they've been in hybrid or they've been homeschooled and they're not moving at all. And research shows that we know that the brain benefits from 20 minutes of cardio a day. That's all we need to get those neurotransmitters wiring and firing. And so really, helping them to structure or have a loose structure, and to have hope again, reminding them it's going to end, and focusing on something that is right or something that they have to look forward to.
absolutely. What about when you move into like the older teenagers, high school students? Is that anything different to apply?
A lot of that still applies, but I think we have to acknowledge too that a lot of them are, I see so many say I'm left out and this is what's going on. And I really try to teach them that we've done them a disservice, that things are not what they appear. And I love like that duck analogy. It looks like someone's just sailing through, but the duck's frantically swimming underneath. It's to look for what's underneath, and know that other people are struggling too. I know a lot of my kids said, I didn't know anyone else was struggling. And one said one at lunch, and then every single other kid said, I'm having panic, I'm having anxiety too. So really helping them understand that they're not alone and everyone is struggling in different ways. And then I think parents, when we think about talking to our teens, we have to remember, if you sit down and make it a face-to-face weird conversation, they don't want to talk. So don't make it so serious. Have it be when you're driving, if you're shooting hoops with them, if you're doing something, you're going to get so much more out of them, and they're going to be so much more open if they don't feel like they're sitting and that there's something wrong or they're in trouble for what's going on. And just, say, let me help you be creative to get some of these needs met that your brain needs. You're supposed to be with peers more than adults at this age, and you can't be. And so I do think that they also feel left out more often, but reminding them that it's not that people don't want to be with them, but they're not traveling in herds right now. Yeah. So they're going to be left out. And, just helping them see things that maybe they don't see. And, teaching them that, like I said, all emotions come and go. Happiness comes and goes. You don't just get the perfect boyfriend and then you're happy forever. It's a feeling, and it comes and goes throughout life, and we just got to go with it. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, this is great information. And as people get into their young adult, early 20s, now they have to take the responsibility of becoming an adult. So are there any other little things that you would recommend to young 20-year-olds? Because I know some are coming out of college expecting to have a career set up for them, and a lot of times now they don't have that. So it's a crisis in itself.
Well, that's a crisis. And then that does lead me to the college kids. And I do a lot of telemed with my college kids, and particularly people that went away. They literally went to a school and they were so excited, and they couldn't meet anyone because they're not allowed to have anyone in their dorm room. If you get COVID and you test positive, you go to a quarantine dorm, you're given a blanket and a pillow, and you don't leave a room for 2 weeks. And so these kids are all so depressed because they think that they're supposed to be happy, right?
Yeah.
And so I think really helping them understand, in a pandemic where you can't do anything at your age, you're normal that you're not happy. It's normal you're struggling, because this goes against everything that you were hoping for and that's going on. And so then these kiddos that are coming out, they don't know what to do. And if they're moving to a different state, they're alone and isolated. So I think really helping them understand that we're gonna push through, and maybe I think we need more groups. We've hit this COVID fatigue part where my teens and young adults are like, we're as close as we have been to the end. And they're like, and we just don't care at all, because we're so done that we don't care. And so we have to figure out how to get them to care. And part of that is modeling and showing them what we're doing. and going back to the basics, but also letting them know it's okay for them to need help longer. Like there's this, we have been taught when you do this, and you do this, but now things are different. So you may need more support emotionally for a longer period of time. And that's okay. In fact, I think we need to teach people that we always need emotional support. Adults need emotional support when they're going through hard things. The need for that doesn't go away. And I think we would need to normalize that that's not a sign of weakness. That's a sign of strength, which I don't know. Have you heard of this book, The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse?
No, I haven't.
Oh my gosh, this is my favorite book that goes back to all the basics of life. It's a book for a 4-year-old or an 80-year-old. It says, one of our greatest freedoms is how we react to things. Isn't it odd? We can only see our outside, but nearly everything happens on the inside. And then they say, everyone is a bit scared, said the horse, but we are less scared together. And that's the key word. Together, we need to come together. And tears fall for a reason. And they are your strength, not your weakness. And like, what's the bravest thing you've ever done? Ask for help.
Yeah.
So this book literally needs to be our motto for coming out of COVID, because it's the simple things of it's okay to not be okay. And we will be a village. And of course you don't feel okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the rug was pulled out from under us. We weren't expecting this. And just even thinking about that from a mental health perspective, is there anything we can do differently to help us prepare for the next event? Because obviously there's rumblings of, we could have another virus in the future. No one knows when, but we've had them in the past. So what is it that we can do differently? Is it having mental health coaching to children? Is it getting parents prepared? What
I think it's teaching the parents and mental health coaching for the kids. And this is going to be something that could change the world, whether we have another pandemic or not. I don't know where we got to the point where we just assumed that kids were going to figure out what to do with their feelings without someone teaching them. And I think part of that was because we didn't talk about feelings. And so it's confusing. So I think there needs to be a lot of parental support, parental education, and just in general, I think every school needs to have mental health education for staff, for the kids. I just think we need a lot of that, and, just to normalize it too, and to provide resources and just all wrap our heads around this together.
I agree. I mean, I remember in elementary school, you had music class, you had art class. I remember getting introduced to health later on, but never mental health. No psychologist ever came in and talked about feelings or talked about how to process something, how to think about things differently. And I can see huge benefits to kids. And as they grow up, if we could have a change in school systems that would allow for that.
Yes. And I've been doing a lot of free talks to schools for the purpose that they don't have that. And it's not included in that. I have kids that text me and say, Miss Carron, I'm having a panic attack and my teacher won't let me leave. So then I have to get out to so we really need to educate everyone that first and foremost, we have to have these kids' mental health be okay, or they're going to get further behind. And without that, we don't really have anything, because our body is a system that works together, and our mental health directly impacts our physical health. And I think that this is giving us an opportunity to see how powerful mental health can be, and how powerful your mindset can be, and just really basic skills that we don't teach. So, teaching breathing, teaching if you do X, Y, and Z, your brain will get stronger. Teaching people it's okay to not be okay. Just, and that asking for help is strength. That's brave.
And allowing people the space to do that and let them be vulnerable without punishment, without fear of retribution, without fear of just any type of negative feeling that might go with it. If we can allow people to ask and not have any type of criticism of that, it opens up a different type of relationship.
So if we're asking our goal is to teach our kids not to judge their emotions. We shouldn't be judging people's either, right?
Yes.
And I think it's that judgment that creates so much anxiety. But the truth of the matter is, the way that our society is and the way things are going, everyone's going to experience anxiety and depression at some point. And it's so treatable, and you can have so much more joy out of life. So let's teach them how to do it. And let them know it's okay.
That's wonderful. And I love the fact that you're now presenting to different groups, schools, and organizations, because if we can get that out there, we can start making changes. And part of it is the lack of knowledge sometimes. And so once you get the knowledge, then you can start making changes because you know where to go with it. So,
yes. And I would say this field pre-pandemic was impossible to navigate. And now it's even harder to navigate. It's really hard to find someone that fits with your kid or their personality, or that specializes in what you need. And it's a really hard field to navigate. And so part of helping people navigate means we have to talk about it to then tell people where to go and how to get there.
Absolutely. I can understand that. So you went through so many different things for how parents can help kids at different stages. Let's say you come across someone who's suffering. Is there anything else that we should look out for, or what should go through our mind to try to get that person help, if it's whether it's us doing it or guide them to someone like you?
Yeah, well, that's a hard one because the answer is different based off like age. But the first thing we want to do is say, like, I see you. I see you're not okay, and it's okay you're not okay, and I'm going to walk through this with you. I'm going to make sure that you get what you need, and you have it in you. It's just you're depleted, and the pandemic has done that to a lot of people. And it may be that you're working 80 hours a week. It may be that, something else happened, but just not ignoring it, talking, and then finding somebody to hook them up with the right person. I've even tried to think of how I could develop an app. And I've been talking to some people because I'm like, we need an app that links people so that people know where to go. It's just so prevalent. That the other thing I would like to emphasize is pediatricians and primary care doctors are now more willing than ever to actually treat and discuss mental health. So that's just something really good for the general public to know, is that they are much more willing to do that, and they see what's happening firsthand. And so I think that the key part is just, you're not alone. And we can help you, and breaking things down into steps, because when people feel so overwhelmed, they go into fight, flight, or freeze, and they freeze. And so that's what I'm seeing with a lot of these kids is there's so many assignments because they didn't do them because they're sitting in their bed. And then it gets to a point where there's so many, they can't do anything. Or maybe it's a mom who their kid hasn't slept all week and they've worked 70 hours a week and they just can't. And so it's, how can we break this into something that's just big enough where you can feel a sense of accomplishment and success so that you can keep going, and breaking it down and helping people figure out how to break it down.
Yeah, that's incredible. I really appreciate all this information. Is so valuable for anyone, whether they have kids or not, because we all know someone who has kids or have kids in our lives. And, really wonderful. And so people, how can they work with you? Is it in person, virtual? Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I love connecting people. That's one of my biggest things. So before all of this, I have a practice, and I have 3 kids of my own, and, was working 20 hours. And now all of a sudden I'm like working way more hours than a normal human, trying to like be a full-time mom. So I've changed some things, and that's why I've started doing some writing. And my group, we're noticing that there is a need. So for instance, just one example is this book, Superpowered, is amazing, but it's also a lot for someone that doesn't know how to digest it. And so it's okay, maybe reaching out to the author or doing a group where we help parents learn how to parent during the pandemic. And maybe we suggest a series of books. I love, for young kids, The Whole Brain Child is should be a handout that they give you when you leave the hospital, and they don't. And for kids and teens in general, the Big Life Journal, talking about finding a growth mindset and learning skills preventatively or proactively. Those are great things. On our website, we have books broken down by need. Bibliotherapy is really helpful. People can reach out via email and, say, this is what's going on. Do you think I need to go to XYZ, or is there a group? I mean, quite frankly, we're all creating things as they're coming, because the need is so big that we almost need, it's like, okay, well, I see a pocket here, and I had a bunch of kids that needed like a COVID support group. And then I saw a bunch of people who had lost loved ones. And so one of the lovely people that I work with works for hospice. And I said, would you please do a group for them? And so it's kind of stating the need. And then as practitioners, we have to find a way to meet the need and get creative.
Absolutely. And the more we can work together and help each other out, the better. So
it's no one's fault. Like, I feel like I want to reiterate, the schools didn't do this on purpose. Everybody just did the best that they could.
Right.
But we also just have to say, okay, well, here we are, and this is what we know, and let's go from here.
Yeah. Even though we've bumbled along here and, changed things, made different decisions, we're learning. And that's what makes us human.
Right. And that is what is fun, is to learn. And that's where I love teaching people making mistakes isn't bad. Yeah. It actually helps you learn, and perfect doesn't exist. And I think that we were moving in such a direction that kids thought they had to be perfect, and with filters and with this and that, and saying like, life is messy.
Yes.
It's messy, and it's expected to be messy. But there are people here that love you, and you can get through anything with just one person.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, how can people reach you?
Well, I guess so. Yes, they can reach me through our website, which is astercounseling.org. And I think there's a direct link to email through there. And they also are welcome, to call and leave. I feel like email's easiest right now. I was saying before, unfortunately, there are so many people in need that people are leaving messages, and it's so hard to get back, but it's easier to get back to an email or to say, that's fantastic. Do you have other people that need it? I'll start a group live this way. And I've also, done a lot of the trainings for school counselors and giving them more tools, because they used to just have like these little things, and now everyone has really big things, and they're overwhelmed too.
Yeah. Well, this is great. So I'll include your website on the notes for this, so people can reach out to you. And I see your email right there as well, that under your name, under your photo there, or your video. And so people can reach out to you through that as well, I assume.
Yeah. And call your pediatrician if you need to. Call, your neighbor, your friend. Don't be embarrassed, because everybody needs, I start by telling people, my oldest son, I have him in therapy because he was just predisposed, a little anxious, and he was doing great, but the pandemic rocked everyone's world, and it brought stuff up quickly and without warning. And I feel like I'm giving him a beautiful gift to just learn how to be. And he said, Mom, you teach me all that. And I said, yeah, but it's different from someone else. And so there's no shame in being anxious. There's no shame in having an anxious kid. You're not failing by doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just talking about it.
It's great. And again, we learn too. If we can help our kids, we can learn from them, learn more skills, and it just sets us up for the future as well.
Yeah. And I love teach me what it's like. I can't even begin to imagine what it would be like. Yeah. What is it like? And how could we maybe meet in the middle on some things? Talk. That's so important, is talking.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy woman, and thank you so much for joining us and sharing great information. Wonderful.
Thank you. And if anybody needs anything, I'm I don't go anywhere.
Wonderful, thank you. And the rest of you, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you got a lot of information. I know I did, and I'll be able to help people in my lives. So have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Bye.